Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, iconic art comes in so many different forms, and guess what? If you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening. And if you are, keep listening. Can hit that subscribe button. Give us a like. Give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider of choice. We're available pretty much everywhere. Places like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and plus we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So you can give us a like and subscribe there as well. We'd absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook. We're on the Twitter. We're on the Instagram. We're on the TikTok. We're on the Letterboxd. And we're on the Tumblr at In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because guess what? If we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it even more when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please, do us that kindness and pay us a visit. On this episode, boys and girls, we got a fun one. We're diving into a little bit of rock and roll history, and the film is from director Anton Corbijn, who you may know from a myriad of fantastic pieces like The American Control, Most Wanted Man. This is a documentary, and it's a vital piece of rock history that we're getting told here. The film is called Squaring the Circle, the story of Hipgnosis, which is the artists and the collaborators who were behind some of the most iconic album art in the history of popular music and rock and roll, like Pink Floyd, the Stones, Led Zeppelin. Like, they created all those fantastic tableaus, and this is a fantastic doc. We got so much insight from so many of the people who are still around, people like Paul McCartney, Roger Waters, people that these guys worked with on a regular basis. But I mean, we had the unique pleasure of actually speaking with one half of Hipgnosis, the one and only Aubrey Powell, Poe himself, just to ask about how they, he got approached to make the documentary, and just the evolution of the art form that he's been involved in, and so vital in for so many years. I mean, when you think about it, there are likely more people who have seen, a Pink Floyd album cover or a Led Zeppelin album cover than have seen, the likes of Degas or Chagall or, any artist in the world that you can really think of. This is iconic and in many ways important art, especially from a pop culture standpoint. But when you get a chance, go check out Squaring the Circle. I know it's doing its rounds theatrically, and it's probably going to be on video on demand pretty soon. But first, enjoy our talk with Aubrey Powell, because quite frankly, it is a darn good one.
Very proud of the film, so whatever we need to do, please go ahead and ask.
Well, you should be very proud of the film. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I guess my first question is, like, I'd love to hear the story of how Anton sort of initially approached you to sort of do this. It feels like this has been something very long in the making.
Actually, it's not long in the making, and Anton didn't approach me. What happened was Colin Firth, the well-known British Oscar-winning actor, called me up and said, "Has anybody ever made a film about hypnosis?" And I said, "Well, documentaries and this." And he said, "No, I mean a serious film." I said, "No." He said, "You realize I have all your vinyl and all your books?" And he said, "I'm a huge fan. Could we have lunch?" So I met with him and his producer. And at the end of lunch, he said, "I 100% want to make this film. So if you're on for it, let's go." I said, "Okay." So the next question they asked me was, did I want to be involved in the film? And I said, "No. Only in terms of giving information and archival stuff and all the rest of it. But in terms of the actual content of the film and the script of the film, I wanted to leave it up to them to tell the story, warts and all, in the most truthful fashion about the legacy of hypnosis." He said, "Who would you like to direct it?" I said, "There's only one man to direct this film, and that's Anton Corbijn." Anton Corbijn I didn't know. I'd never met him, but I knew his work and I was a huge fan. I thought he his pictures were so raw and brutal that and his films, like The American Control, I thought were excellent. And I thought this man could do service to Hipgnosis. So I flew to Amsterdam, and after about 2 hours, he left to make a phone call. And the producer said, I think we're 2-0 down. I don't think he wants to do this one. He came back from the phone call, sat down, he said, okay, I'll do it. And I was like, God, I could not have wished for anybody better to take on this project. And I think it was difficult for him because he'd never made a documentary before. And the other thing is that he was making a documentary about not a rival in the sense of somebody who was any threat to him, but somebody who already had a reputation. And the company had reputation, considerable reputation from the 1970s, which was really prior to his success in the music industry in creating imagery. So I think it was quite a challenge for him. But boy, did he rise to the challenge.
Well, amen to that, sir. I mean, for sure, it is a hell of a film. And I mean, I'm kind of curious. I can imagine, obviously, you were a primary source for, especially when it comes to research and sort of archival material. But at the same time, like, what kind of sort of roads did Anton have to go down to really find everything? Because I mean, again, this is such a fantastic story, but like you said, you wanted to make sure you told it warts and all. How was it for you to sort of help him open that door to really dive into the history of what Hipgnosis was?
Well, Colin Firth's film company has a great research team, and I have a great archive. I've hoarded everything since Hipgnosis began. I've got bus tickets, I've got my passports, I've got invitations to Elvis Presley convention. I've got all kinds of stuff, and so I gave them access to my archive, and that revealed a huge amount of material. Also, the books that I've written, he had access to those, obviously, and Trish Chetty, who was, I would say, very instrumental was one of the producers in giving Anton all the information that he needed. Absolutely grilled me to the end of the day. I spent hours and hours and hours talking with her about how Hipgnosis was, what it was all about, etc. All of which she compiled into a document and then gave it to Anton, and he, with her, produced a script of the film that they've made. Now, I had never had privilege to that script because I had said, I don't want to see it, I want to see the finished film. And I didn't see anything about what they were doing until I went to the screening. I was bowled over. I was stunned, to say the least, and the truthfulness of the whole thing. The way that he got the relationship between Storm and myself, etc., was phenomenal. So I just think the film is a masterpiece.
Now, I mean, obviously for you, I mean, like you said, you wanted this to be warts and all. You didn't want it to be just the highlights. How was it for you sort of going through, I guess, maybe some of the more bumpier moments in the history of Hipgnosis, especially, like you said, the relationship between you and Storm?
It was an emotional experience. I mean, it's not often in your own lifetime that you have a film made about yourself. And, with such a prestigious backer as Colin Firth. And so for me, when the process started, I went in completely clear-headed and determined to just speak the truth. And it got very emotional at times. It really did, because I'm talking about somebody who loved like a brother, who I worked with like a brother, and who for 15 years of our lives, we were intertwined 24 hours a day in everything that we did. And when you're young and, coming out of your teenage years and you involve yourself in a relationship like that, it has a very deep and powerful influence on the rest of your life. And Storm did with me, and likewise with him. And so to talk about certain things were difficult. But what Anton has captured is the volatility between Storm and I, as well as the creativity. And I don't think you can have one without the other. And if you look at the relationship of, let's say, Noel and Liam Gallagher, or you look at the relationship of Mick and Keith in the Stones, or Roger Waters and David Gilmour in Pink Floyd. You look at these creative relationships, and they come out of a certain amount of antagonism, as well as having the joy of actually creating something that's really good. So Storm and I worked incredibly well like that. He was often the ideas man, and I was the producer of the imagery. And we accepted those roles. And also, I handled the business for us. So, but yeah, it was a fiery art studio, that's for sure.
Now, I'm curious, in seeing the film for the first time, like in seeing people like Paul and Robert and Roger sort of talk about their impact on their careers, does that kind of give you a sense of legacy? Because I mean, even I was thinking about this and watching the film. Your art has been more readily available and hung in more sort of individual homes that, you know, perhaps some of the great masters that are hanging in the Louvre and things of that nature. Like, you get a sense of legacy when you're being able to watch a film like this.
Well, I think you get a sense of legacy when 50 years later, you know, people like Paul McCartney or Robert Plant or Roger Waters or Noel Gallagher, people, you know, who are, you know, they're major stars in the music industry and have been for a long time, come forth and graciously give their time and their gratitude to the work that we did. And I think that's very touching. It was interesting because when we started the film, Anton and the producer said to me, "So how do we get hold of everybody?" And I said, "Well, I've got my little black book here. I just phone them up and ask them." That's exactly what I did. And it was classic when I called Jimmy Page, because I've been friends with these people all my life. It's not like I'm not friends with them now. We see each other, you know, not that often, but we do. And, you know, when I called up Paul McCartney and I said, okay, so for his, and he calls me Posey. He said, "Hey, Posey, how you doing?" I said, "Well, here's what's happening. There's a film being made about hypnosis." I said, "It's Hipgnosis. It's Anton Corbijn who's going to direct it, and you." He said, "Anton Corbijn, Hipgnosis, and me. Count me in. I'm in." And Jimmy Page said the same thing too, exactly. So it wasn't a question of having to go through managements and coerce people into doing things or offer incentives. Everybody wanted to be a part of this film. They really did. And that, to me, is probably the highest form of flattery for any legacy that you could possibly have.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, I have to make a full disclosure because, I mean, I'd always been a fan of your Band on the Run cover, but admittedly, I'd always thought it was just the band. And then when I saw the film and I'm like, wait a minute, James Coburn, you know, it's Christopher Lee. And then I pulled it out again and I'm like, holy shit. I had never realized it. I mean, I'm kind of curious. It's one of those things where even initially when that cover came out, was it immediate that you had sort of all these sort of famous faces there with Paul and Linda, or was it one of those things that sort of grew over time?
What happened was that I went to see Paul, and it was the first time that we'd worked for a Beatle. And I think I said in the film that when you get a call from a Beatle, especially, you know, the Beatles actually only broke up in 1972, so only talking about a year later. You know, when you get a call from a Beatle, it's like a call from God. You know, "Hey man, could you come and work for me? I've got an interesting project and I really like what you've been doing." "Oh yes." So Paul gave me a list of all the celebrities that he could think of that he'd quite like to have in this breakout from a prison. And, you know, I recognized that actually the symbol of this image is really him breaking away from the Beatles. You know, that's what it is. And so I realized how important it was to him. So I set about calling all the people on the list that I could. Well, there were some people who didn't want to be on an album cover. You know, in those days, album covers were not necessarily considered the art form they are now, funnily enough. There were some people who couldn't make it through other commitments and stuff like that. So I went back to Paul with a short list of people that we had, some of them English, as you say, American actor, English boxer, John Conte, you know, various other. Michael Parkinson, a famous English celebrity presenter, TV. And he said, "All right, I'll have these guys. These will work well for me." He was very happy. He wasn't, he wasn't annoyed that certain other people couldn't make it. He just said that what's important is there's a couple of recognizable faces in there. I said, okay. So then we set it up, and you know, and Storm, being Storm, who could be very bullish and you know, abrasive and directorial. He said, you deal with the photography and let me deal with the artists. And he did. And you see in the film how, you know, he's pushing them around, telling them what to do. And Storm, with something like Paul and people like that, he was very capable of doing that with such assurance that people believed in what he was doing. And sure enough, the picture we got was great.
Yeah.
And Paul loved it. And that set off a relationship for the rest of my life with Paul, really. And certainly with Hipgnosis, for the next 15 years, we did everything for Paul. After that, we acted as his art directors, if you like, in everything he wanted to do. Venus and Mars, London Town, all the other things he did.
Now, I'm curious because, I mean, obviously that era in rock and roll, it was such a key thing. And I mean, it really was the rise of the album cover. But at the same time, I'm curious,
Yes.
like from your perspective, could Hipgnosis sort of, was that the perfect time for this company to exist and to thrive? Because it doesn't feel like today, for example, like Taylor Swift would be approving her cover art in sort of from the backseat of from the trunk of a car kind of thing.
Yes. You've got to remember that in the 70s, album covers sold in tens of millions. So the world of music was awash with money. And from the day that Peter Blake did Sgt. Pepper for the Beatles, that changed the look of album covers. No longer was it a picture of the band on the front with some big white letters with their name and a big white text saying the name of the album. This gave us an opportunity from his work to do what I call, you know, he created a living sculpture, basically. This was a piece of art, Sgt. Pepper. It happened to coincide with the same time that we created Saucerful of Secrets. So it was a momentum that was going along in the zeitgeist, in the underground. You know, we were part of that. We lived in an area of Chelsea where, you know, Mick Jagger and Marianne Faithfull would come round to our apartment. John Donovan would come, you know, we're all part of that Chelsea community at that time. And it was definitely what I would call the underground, I suppose, because Pink Floyd were really starting out. They were making inroads and they were considered the underground movement in the psychedelic world. And so to be a part of all that scene was the right time at the right place. And I think this is always important for anybody in any circumstance if you want to get ahead. Right time, right place is everything. And it just so happened at that point in time, the only people in the record world who had power over their own creative future were the Beatles. They were the only band who could do whatever they wanted on their album covers. That was the deal that was signed with EMI at the time. The second band to get that were Pink Floyd. In those days, it was normal for bands to work with the in-house art departments, who were gentlemen who wore white gloves and wore white clinical coats. It was bizarre. It was this most sterile environment you can imagine. So when Storm and I would wander in, long hair, earrings, velvet trousers, and flowery jackets, and bright green high-heeled shoes, there was a gasp of horror that the new age was upon them. And it's true to say that that the moment we started to create album covers, starting from Saucerful of Secrets to Pink Floyd, other people immediately wanted to lock onto us. You know, the pretty things, Mark Bolan, T.Rex. You know, it just happened. It moved along very quickly. And within 5 years, by 1973, when Dark Side of the Moon hit the streets, sold, I don't know, 65 million albums or something, we were the go-to studio in London for any budding musician or established musicians. And 73 was the big tipping point where our finances and our fame rose stratospherically. And we were extremely privileged and fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. So it was hard work. I have to say, the first 5 years of Hipgnosis, we were poor, we had no money, but we believed in what we were doing. and we worked 14 hours a day, 7 days a week to make it work, and it paid off.
For sure. And I mean, there was such unbridled creativity at the time, but I mean, at the same time, I appreciated sort of moments of sadness, and particularly the story of Sid coming into the studio, just with Floyd, but also it pairs so well with just the story of Hipgnosis sort of venturing into film and the ultimate kind of failure there. And I mean, I'm kind of curious.
Yes.
Do you feel that sort of the unbridled creativity and the money and just sort of the, I guess, really the freedom you guys almost had, especially when you guys were at the peak of your success, kind of led to the downfall when you guys sort of ventured into film? Because it definitely was one of those things where it didn't feel like the two were going to mesh. Because obviously with film, it takes a village. You've got to have a bit more of a structure. It's a different beast.
That's exactly correct. I mean, as soon as we realized that MTV was the place to be and not album covers, we moved into movie making. And at first, it all worked incredibly well, but there were roles to be played, exactly the same as they were in Hipgnosis, which we had to accept. And we divided the responsibilities. I would be the producer and writer. Peter Christopherson, who was by then a member of Hipgnosis, would be the lighting director and contributor in writing, and the Storm would be the director of any films we made. This was a conscious decision. The only difficulty was that I think we'd been used to such fame and a lot of money by that time, and I'm talking about the early 80s here, is that it's very difficult to have a structure where you're controlling your best friend and brother. And Storm was a person by nature who would not say, okay, I adhere to those rules. And consequently, friction grew between him and me in terms of, yes, I wanted fame, success, and money. And what he wanted to do was spend all the money and forget the rest. And this was his nature. He couldn't help it. But I couldn't see any point in making a feature film that took us 3 months to make and cost $2 million and at the end of it being dead. And for him it was like, well, we spent the money on the film. I couldn't go along with that, and nor could Peter Christopherson. And in the end, it exploded, and it was a tragedy, because like many things in life, when people break up, it's to do with ego, it's to do with money, it's to do with position, it's to do with individuality, where you feel you want to express yourself on your own without the other person. Just as we see with other bands, Pink Floyd, perfect example, and other bands who have broken up because people get a sense of independence and they want to go alone. And that's what happened between Storm and me. And I had never envisaged that we would never be joined at the hip for the rest of our lives in creativity, but it just wasn't to be. And I think we were both shell-shocked for a long time that we'd actually broken up.
For sure. Now, I mean, just last question, just to put a bow on this.
Sure, whatever you want.
In watching this film, it really does feel like you've all captured really sort of the essence of what the album cover meant, especially sort of in the pop culture zeitgeist for popular music, and how influential it was, especially going forward into the 80s, 90s, and so on. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, where does Hipgnosis sit sort of in the history of the pop culture zeitgeist?
In the last few years, starting in 2017, when I created the Pink Floyd exhibition at the Victorian Albert Museum in London, which hosted 415,000 people in 4 months. It was the largest exhibition they'd ever had and contained a huge amount of Hipgnosis imagery. I realized that finally Hipgnosis has been accepted in the traditional marketplace of museums. Since then, I've had many exhibitions in museums. I've just had one in Holland at the Groningen Museum, and in 4 months, it was Hipgnosis only pictures. There were 110,000 people attended. Late in life and late in the career of Hipgnosis, the legacy had really, really ramped up. And this film actually, really gives you a sense that we were always there, but we have stood the test of time. I mean, when you look at this film, for me, you look at the imagery in it. I mean, many of the imagery is over 50 years old, but it's actually stood the test of time in what you see. I mean, the red balls in the desert, one of my favorite photographs, for example, for the nice elegy. This could have been done yesterday. It's a powerful piece of landscape art. And the joy for me of Hipgnosis now is that the legacy lives on, and that it's more well known and recognized as a serious art form, not just a photograph on a piece of cardboard, a serious art form, as we intended it to be at the time. Everything was thought through. It was very cerebral. It was very designed, very intended, not accidental pictures, that it's finally recognized to be fine art. And I think that breakthrough is such a joy for me and such a privilege for Hipgnosis.
Well, I mean, if I may, Poe, that was very eloquently said. And I mean, honestly, thank you so much for the work. Thank you for participating in this film. And honestly, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you very much, and appreciate your interest.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.